Good morning and welcome to another edition of Deadass Marketing. I am your host, Mike Doherty, and joined by the lovely and ever so fabulous Angela Duns. Angela, what did you do last night?
I went to see Barbie, sold out theater in Fairfax, California, and a line around the block.
You know what? We don't need another topic. We have Barbie, and I think that's probably where we should go, where we should stay, and where we should revisit. There's been so much hype around this movie, and I think from a marketing perspective, there's a lot to unpack. I will
Yes.
admit I have not seen the movie. However, I have a 12-year-old daughter, so I've been subjected to aspects of it. Um, New nails. Thank you very much. I don't know that directly attributable to Barbie, but somehow it is what it is. So we have, like I said, so much to unpack with regard to marketing. I mean, particularly when you look at there's a writer's strike. There's so much going on in Hollywood, and yet we have this really
Oh my
hot
God.
summer movie-wise and release-wise, right? Between Oppenheimer and Barbie,
Yes.
these are some breakout movies in what I think is a relatively slow movie year. I'm sure
Yes.
that somebody, will critique that and tell me why I'm wrong, and please do so in the comments, and more power to you. But as far as I know, and I can't tell you that
Yes.
I'm
Well,
au
we've
fait
gotten
when it
used
comes
to
to
watching
that.
movies at home.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. All right. So we've been hearing about Barbie for at least 6 months, right? And we've seen the trailers
At least.
at least, right? So we have some big names that are leading the movie, and some big supporting cast. So what, from a marketing perspective, do you think was different about this movie, and what caused you to want to go see it?
The marketing, I mean, 6 months ago, you were seeing people using the Barbie frame for memes in social media. And seriously, that includes LinkedIn.
Hmm.
I've seen a couple of attorneys, female attorneys, use the Barbie framing and relate it back to business. And that was the beginning of this year. So
Hmm.
the hype and the marketing and the pre-releases and being able to pose inside those big frames at the theater with your girlfriends, it's just been so interactive and so engaging and so pink and and just it's novelty. It is, there's a certain amount of whimsy to this. And I think that's what we needed to sort of have some sort of a demarcation between the pandemic and now it's post pandemic. We're back in real life doing things. There hasn't been a movie release like this since pre pandemic, honestly. And as you mentioned, the writer's strike and what's going on, we don't know what's going to happen with the fall schedule for movies and television because of the writer's strike. And
Well,
so
most of them
having,
are in the can for years before they're released. So, I mean, we'll continue to see releases. We just, whether or not
right,
there's new pipeline, right? But,
right.
so I want to unpack this from a marketing perspective. And one of the things that I want to start with is this concept of creating the lead up. Because so many people believe, whether it's SEO or whatnot, that there's this overnight success when it comes to marketing. That I'll do a Google ad, I'll do an SEO campaign, and tomorrow my traffic will change. Where if you look at the marketing of this movie, which I think is very successful, the marketing in itself is amazing. Engaging people, the interactive aspects that you mentioned, the framing, the participation. But this has been going on for months. So, this is an overnight success that took years to build. And
Exactly.
and I think that most successful marketing campaigns are overnight successes that take years to build. And
Right.
what we do, the problem is what we see is the outcome, right?
Yes.
Barbie hits the movie theaters, it's huge, right? This big success. But this has been going, the marketing aspect of this, at least from, an active campaign has been at least 6 months, right?
Yes.
They check all the boxes where they were omnipresent. They were on LinkedIn. You were seeing this on LinkedIn. You were seeing this on all the social challenges. They dropped a ton of, trailers on YouTube. So we had lots of sneak previews, excuse me. We've heard all, there's been some, I think minimal, but some drama around the cast, and we get those little news snippets, so it stays topical in the news. Then there's been a whole aspect of, like there's been a lot of talk with regard to she steps off the shoes and they didn't have to use CGI. She was able to do it herself, and that whole aspect. And that's like a discussion point. And who cares whether, like, I don't really care whether she did it or whether it was CGI, but apparently I'm reading the article anyway. And it just keeps it in the forefront. And I don't think there has been a better example of brand awareness. I mean, first of all, the brand existed, and the brand was a huge brand before the movie existed, right? Clearly, Barbie is a huge
spanning
brand.
generations.
I mean, I'm old, and Barbie was around when I was a kid, and I'm pretty sure she may predate me. So I think Barbie's older than I am, and I'm old. So, so you have a really well-established, respected brand. What's interesting with, the perspective of that Barbie is, she has historically been challenged as a poor representation of women, right? Because, first of all, she's anatomically incorrect and impossible to achieve, right? She apparently, if she were to exist in real life, she'd fall over. She creates a beauty standard that, it was quite
impossible
questionable
to achieve.
Well, not only impossible to achieve, but just even questionable. Like, is this really what you want your daughters?
Yep.
It was sort of interesting when, I have a daughter. So, of course, this came in the purview, and I was like, well, is this what I want for my daughter? It was like, but at the same time, they countered that, right? And I'm still talking about Barbie the brand. I haven't gotten to the movie yet, but still talking about Barbie the brand. She's been a doctor, an astronaut, a housewife, a surgeon, surfboarder, so she has theoretically broken barriers as far as this woman's taken a lot of jobs. She's been busy. But clearly, this idea of you can be whoever you want to be. And that has always been an aspect of Barbie, right? In the branding, in the messaging around Barbie. There are definitely some negative aspects around the brand, like we said, about some of those expectations. But they've also looked to counter them where they, the messaging. So we have a well-known established brand. So that just, getting into it, that's a nice place to start from, is if your brand has brand awareness. But even beyond that brand awareness, this is a marketing campaign that I'm sure from a planning perspective goes back years. And then from a launch perspective, we know at least 6 months of active engagement before the movie even releases.
Right. And they had something for everybody. I mean, I remember seeing in the Wall Street Journal an article about the woman who originally created Barbie, and it was fascinating. So, they had the whimsical, light-hearted stuff, but they also had, the history, the backstory, the side story, and as you mentioned, the controversy about some of the casting, and then just, yada, yada, yada.
But if you go back, I mean, I'm not sure. I want to say it's I don't remember who said this, but the idea of like there's no such thing as bad publicity, right? It keeps it in the news cycle. It keeps,
yes,
people are talking about it, no
perpetual.
matter what you feel with regard to Barbie, or whether what you felt about the casting. It was, it kept it in the news. It kept it, you don't get better brand awareness than that. So good news, bad news, news is all important when it comes to brand awareness. Obviously, if this is your brand, you want to sort of manage that, right? Because it can go south really fast if it's really bad. So, there was definitely some pushback, but it was minimal, right? And I think it was well managed. And I think the other aspects of the campaign more than overcame that. And yet all of it continued to create awareness.
Right. I mean, even the shortage of pink paint. Did you
Well,
read
it's
that
not so
article?
much. No, but my daughter told me this. So we're in the car over the weekend, and she's like, "Do you know that there's this shortage of pink paint?" And I'm like, okay, no, I did not know this. But what it is that Mattel, not Martell, but Mattel has the intellectual property on that shade of pink, that specific Barbie pink Mattel owns. Brilliant, right? So because they control the IP on the pink, they can control, its supply,
The
and thus
use
the
of the
result of
Barbie name
the
as
Barbie name.
describing a pink.
Right. It's the Barbie pink. And, if you're buying, we haven't even gotten into merchandising, and I'm sure that we've only begun to see the tip of the iceberg around the merchandising, but just the very fact that the, licensed pink paint that I'm sure has Barbie splashed all over it, pun intended, is out of stock, tells you how huge the merchandising on this movie is going to be. Right. So again,
Yes.
you don't get better examples of omni-channel than, they sell out of paint that they own. That they own the IP to that particular shade of Barbie pink.
And it goes way beyond Mattel. Century City got splashed all over the screen, and there are other brands that were mentioned inside of this movie.
So
So
product
there's,
placement. Yeah.
yes, yeah,
Right.
it's pretty
So I mean, and
incredible.
none of this happens accidentally, right? So this is all planned, plotted, and construed. So, I mean, like, again, years of planning and marketing have gone into this, whether it's product placement or merchandising or the promotion of the movie. So the first aspects that I really sort of want to, hammer is marketing in itself, as by example of Barbie, is a process that takes time, right? This movie, if there was no marketing leading up to this movie, it may or may not have been successful, right? I would question how successful it would be had it not had the huge marketing campaigns that it had pushing it, and that obviously paid off.
And, I'm also super, super curious about if the timing was planned, because the timing was absolutely perfect. I mean, I'm sure that they planned it as a summer movie, but, there's so much more going on there.
Yeah, and I mean, and again, I haven't seen the movie, but I've heard enough, and you can fill me in where I'm missing the blanks. But obviously, there's some really important messaging that comes out of the movie that's conveyed in the movie. But before we get into that, there's also the timing, which is, there's a lot going on right now that's probably not so pleasant. If
Yes.
I am completely glued to the news cycle, like just what now, what now, what now, right? So there's a lot of negative news and things going on, and Barbie and the movie and then is total escapism, conceptual.
Yes.
There's some important messaging in it, but it's escapism, right? I mean, it's Barbie, for God's sake.
I saw women who were in their 60s show up in pink tutus,
Right.
pink
And
tulle everywhere.
what's really interesting is, and I'm guessing this is intentional, but it is played off of probably one of the most negative, sort of depressing movies, as its counterpart. So you have a choice when you go to the theater. There's two blockbusters out there. There's Oppenheimer and there's Barbie. So if you want
Barbenheimer.
right, but I'm saying, but if you want to go down the path of death and destruction, don't go see Barbie. But if you want to be uplifted and you want some, escapism in your life, go see Barbie. And I would agree with you. The timing's, because we couldn't need that more at this point in time.
Yes. It's so true. And what really struck me when I was in the theater last night was the number of men. And sitting right next to Laura and I were two guys that came together to see the movie. So they're not with their women or any
Mm.
women at all. They just came out of curiosity, or I'm not sure. I heard them laugh so many times. It was really interesting, Mike.
And okay, and then the second aspect I'm going to bring up, which I think is hugely important when it comes to marketing, is involving your audience, right? So whether it's user generated content or interactive aspects, but Barbie is an example of engaging the audience. They engaged the audience before they even saw the movie. Like you said, people were using, the pink frames for their social media. People were dressing in pink. There were pink days, right? So apparently they're painting a lot of things pink all over. I'm sure, somewhere there's lots of pink painting or, paint houses or whatnot. So, and this was all pre-movie. So, they did an amazing job in engaging their audience and getting their audience to promote the movie by default,
And
which is a huge thing.
and I think the brilliance of it is they were making women feel seen and heard in a way that was a little bit more playful and safe. And if you can get your audience involved that way, it's going to perpetuate itself.
And yet there's still a really important underlying message,
Yes.
which
I
you can
mean,
share with us, being that I haven't seen the movie.
well, the takeaway is the quote from Gloria in the very middle of the movie about it's impossible
Spoiler
to be
alert,
a
just in
woman.
case you haven't seen it. Yeah.
Well, it's all over social media. So, but thanks for the spoiler alert.
Yeah, just in case. So what did she say? Sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, I saw this as a post on LinkedIn yesterday. It was a pink carousel that had the entire quote, and it's pretty long. And it's a woman who works at Mattel who has this brilliant quote about it's impossible to be a woman. And then she launches into all the hundreds of ways why it's impossible to be a woman. You need to be skinny, but not too skinny, but you can't ever talk about being skinny. And you need to be in shape, but you can't do it to be skinny. And it just goes on and on and on about all this other stuff. You need to be a businesswoman, but you can't talk about it. You need to be a mom, but you can't talk about your kids. It just goes on, and it's really, I think it's probably one of the biggest points of the whole movie is how hard it is to be a woman in this culture and this society.
But the messaging is not left there, right? So I would
No.
argue that is the problem statement, or the unmet need. So what was the
Yes.
solution? So then they have to come back with, there has to be, because if you left it at that, that's pretty negative. So clearly that was not the takeaway from the movie. Yes, it's hard to be a woman. However, I'm assuming there's a giant but that will follow.
I think that's a missed opportunity in the movie.
Okay.
To be completely honest.
Okay. You didn't think they addressed the but? They didn't give you a good, strong but?
I don't think they did. Gloria was able to snap all of the Barbies out of some, I don't know, hypnotism that happened during the middle of the movie. And I don't want to give away too much of the plot or lack thereof.
Right.
So
it was a Barbie movie, so it's not rocket science. Right?
It was a useful tool for Gloria to be able to use this angle. But I think my biggest disappointment with the entire movie is that there are several opportunities that were completely missed. And you would expect a Barbie movie to wrap things up in a nice, neat, gigantic pink bow. And I'm still waiting for that.
But that's an interesting, that is, so we lived in Europe for 10 years, right? And we are, film buffs. So we got to experience a lot of film that's not Hollywood based. But that idea of wrapping things up in a nice bow is a Hollywood concept.
Yes.
If you've ever watched a German film, it doesn't end that way. And I remember a couple of years ago, we were at the Berlin and Beyond Film Festival here in San Francisco. And the movie ended on a negative, somewhat unresolved note, right? So, it wasn't clear what, you had a very good sense of what was happening, and it was very bad. And you also had this, but it wasn't explicitly played out. So there was an unknown. It kind of like, it was sort of like the, remember The Sopranos when the screen goes black during the finale, right? You assume something bad happened, but you just never know, right? Because and
Yes.
as American film goers, that drives us nuts. Like, we want it wrapped up with a nice bow,
Resolution.
right? And I think that to not wrap it up with that bow and not to follow the traditional conventions of Hollywood is a very interesting take, because I've seen it in European films. And so the point about the Berlin and Beyond was, there was this movie, it was heading down a very dark path and was left completely unresolved. We don't know, we think we know what happened, but we don't know. So this is a German film being shown in the US at a film festival. And the audience, so, and then afterwards, we had an opportunity to, there was a discussion with the director. So the audience just couldn't let it go. They're like, what happened? What happened?
Oh
And
my God.
he's like, that's where the film ends.
Yeah.
He's like, take it wherever you want to take it. This is, your interpretation, whatever you want. But, there is no answer. That's where the film ends. And
And
the
that
audience
is
could not
brilliant.
accept that. They were
Yeah.
they were angry. They wanted to know, they wanted the bow. They wanted to wrap it up.
Yeah.
So that idea of wrapping the movie up, that's such an American thing, where we
Yes.
needed to wrap up nice. I think we're used to the sitcom, resolve it in 22 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Oh my gosh. And I think the opportunity in this is, if this movie sparks conversations across cultures, across genders, across countries, and really starts to help us have language to talk about this gender gap and all this sort of thing, then it's accomplished a great deal. And a bow would not allow for that.
Does the lack of the bow allow for the next movie?
Well, that too. And it,
Because you wanted, everyone wants to know what happened, right? So the whole idea of not having the bow, especially if you are planning sequels, is people will go back just to figure out or find out or try to find out what happened.
right. Yes. And
So if you were left with a sense of like, but what happened? That would drive you back.
I,
And again,
yeah.
that's completely an American film sort of scenario, where we have this need to wrap things up. But because this is a marketing podcast, I want to sort of flip this around. And when we have this need, which is this wrap things up in a nice bow, what does that mean in marketing? What, do we have to follow that premise in marketing? Do we need to wrap things up in order for people to be satisfied? Or do we need to leave it open so they look for other solutions, or they look for us for a solution? This need for the bow, how do we incorporate that in marketing?
Well, we hear so many times people are talking about urgency, create urgency. We only have this limited time offer, blah, blah, blah. Or, I'm the only one that can do this for you, that kind of thing. Um, that it's that anticipation that sort of spurs some kind of a movement, or, a
Action,
call to
right,
action.
right. And but is that the result of the bow, or are we offering the bow? Are we offering to wrap it up for them? Is that what the call to action is? Come to us for the bow.
I think it's more the Easter egg.
Okay, can you explain?
Um, well, a lot of movies will, like I remember when I went to one of the Marvel movies, and they had an Easter egg in the credits that was like, oh, they introduced a new actor. It was just like, oh my gosh, we have to go and see the next Iron Man
Hmm.
because this person is going to be in that one. So that's where they wrapped it up in a fairly decent bow, but they provided this Easter egg that it just gets you excited for that next movie that's coming. Anything.
And that I think also is another magical marketing tool, right? Those post-credit, snippets, right? Because the
Yes.
movie is technically wrapped up and we're done, but we all stay to see what's in those snippets, right? Um, like
I'm
nobody
such an
is
Easter
getting
egg
up,
hunter.
right? But I mean, and especially if they're in there, right? But and now we come to expect them. But that idea of, we've wrapped up the movie, we've given it the bow, and now we reopen the door
Yes,
through these post-credit, pieces.
exactly. No, it's a brilliant marketing scheme. It because there is a lack of resolution again. It's like, oh, something's coming.
So is it, so let's back up to marketing. So is this an opportunity to is this the upsell?
I think it's I think it's more a creation of loyalty than
Okay.
it is. It can be an upsell. It definitely can be an upsell. That would be super easy. But I think it helps. Last week we talked about community. And how do you keep that community engaged and loyal and coming back for more? And I think part of it is the story's not over. There's
Hmm.
more coming.
Right. And our lives, despite Hollywood, don't tend to wrap up very nicely with bows.
Nope, nope.
Right?
One piece
So
might, but there's all these other pieces and characters.
yeah, I mean, if we do a good job, as service providers, we solve something that we could technically wrap up in a bow. But there's always what's next.
Yes,
Now that you've solved that, what can we work on, or what do you need, or where do we go from here? So there is always that opportunity.
yes.
And
And when your
this is
clients ask you what's next, hey, I loved working with you on this. What else can you do for me? That's a wonderful opportunity.
right. I
You
mean, if they
want to
proactively
set that
ask you
up.
that, that's just great. We normally have to prompt them a little bit, like, to get them, to think that way. Like, okay, we solved this. What about that and that? But again, sort of this idea of the continuing the story, right? Especially in marketing. Okay, we've solved this, which has been a big, headache for you, but it's sort of the Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? When we solve the big basic problem, then we can move on to more intricate problems that, we'll sort of fine tune it or to tweak it a little bit to make it even better. So, whether it's the hierarchy of needs or whatnot, typically when we wrap things up, there's room for improvement, there's room for, advancement. And if you're engaging marketing folks, you're in this hopefully for the long haul. So, now that you've solved that big, ugly problem, now what can we focus on? Where should we focus based on that?
Well, and it's moving towards more and more finesse as you do that. You're
Right.
solving basic problems, but wow, now you can focus on a little bit more fine tuning on the branding or the messaging or the targeting or whatever it might be.
And so going back to the messaging of Barbie, did you feel, as a woman, did you feel empowered walking away from Barbie?
I felt seen and heard. I don't know if I would go quite so. I felt seen and heard. I really think
Yeah.
that's the best answer that I can give you for that.
And
I
so seen and heard, which is great. So in marketing, what we try to do, especially when we present, the problem, is to get the audience to recognize themselves in the problem.
and
Right?
I did, but
And so
empowered,
they
I
did a
think
great
is a
job in that,
stretch.
right?
Yes, yes. I
But
didn't
it's
like
also
the
a very
ending.
crucial, I think it's a crucial and key point of marketing is to present the problem in a way that people can recognize themselves and be seen and
Yes.
heard. Because once you're seen and heard, then you're like, okay, you finally understand me.
And now I trust you and
Right.
I will open the door to allow you to help me or solve my problems or whatever it might be as a marketer that we do.
And when you said you felt seen and heard, was this the first time you felt that way in a movie?
No, no.
Okay.
But
But you felt it this way in the movie, in this movie.
They hit the mark on so many things. There are some things that they really did not.
Hmm.
And that's really interesting. Um, it's supposed to be fun and whimsical to a certain extent. I mean, there's a scene where you're at the top floor of Mattel in LA and they open the door and there's a CEO roundtable of guys in absolutely identical black suits. And spoiler alert, Will Ferrell is the CEO. And it's all men for a Barbie product. I mean, there's not a single woman there. So some of it's kind of a spoof. It's sort of but it's
there's truth
also
in humor.
real. Yes,
there's truth in humor.
Exactly. And they act ridiculous and, completely inept. So there is some humor in all of it, but there is also a pretty heavy dose of reality.
And so what would you take away from that as far as our marketing message, and what do we need to accomplish in our marketing messages to include that dose of reality and make sure that we're not those black guys, those guys in black suits?
I think that we need to be very clear about what problem it is that we solve and what the benefit is from solving that problem for our clients. Whenever there's a lot of gray area, that's where trust kind of goes out the window. So we need to be very clear. Here's the problem that we can help you with, and here's the benefit of solving that problem. And we're going to stick with you all the way through it. And we're going to actually listen.
I also think that this is an opportunity to realize that when we look at our marketing teams, to make sure that we're not echo chambers, to ensure that, particularly if we're dealing with audiences that are different than ourselves, that we make sure that we have reached out to that audience, that we've engaged that audience to get their perspective, versus subjecting them to our version of what we think they need. What we should have is we should have some diversity on our teams. We should have diversity on our messaging. If we don't have that diversity within our own teams, at the very least, we need to make sure we go out to the real world and talk to different people in different communities that are impacted by whatever it is that we're trying to market, so that we understand. We're obviously big proponents of building personas, but we want to make sure that the personas represent our target audience
and are diverse enough in those characteristics that they can be inclusive.
Right. Especially if you're selling across different groups.
Yes. And there's so much to unpack in all of that. I try to be incredibly aware of the images that I use when I'm doing social media management for people, so that it's not all, blonde, successful white people
who are 30 years old.
Exactly. Oh, I'm so age aware. Oh my gosh. I have gotten called on the carpet once for not having the right age representation in an image. And, there's always going to be haters, but I listen to them because there's real information in even your haters.
Yeah. And I mean, we can learn so much from even negative feedback, right? Because there's still something in that messaging. It may not be packaged the way that we want it to be packaged. It may, but if you can get past the negativity of it, there actually might be some really important elements buried in that feedback, right? You aren't reaching the group, or you don't represent this particular interest. You need to diversify. You need to consider other voices. So our haters, as you said, haters are going to hate. However, there might be something buried in that, and that
they create opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, because listen to what they're saying, remove the hatred from it because that is just negative. But can you look at what you're hearing and can you find the truth in it? Because there may be aspects that, again, while it may not be presented in the best light, there may be some underlying truths that we should be addressing, that we should be considering, whether it be diversity, whether it be, representation, those types of things. If you look at our audience, it's quite diverse and there's lots of opportunities. And yet when we represent, again, when we look at stock photos, right, they tend to be very atypical, happy white people around a table type of thing. And that's a very
Yes.
limited representation of our audiences.
Yes. They're getting better, but wow, there's a long ways to go.
I mean, and I also think that, to go back to Barbie, they made it a point to diversify, right? So there was a Barbie of every flavor, if I'm
Oh my gosh, they did a
understanding.
fantastic job of that. And the Kens too.
Right. So they were
That
all,
is
yeah.
that is one place where it was amazing. That was one thing that they did super well.
And what do you think was the point of that?
Um, I know that one of the points of the whole movie, and from a marketing perspective, you're probably going to love this, but Barbie is every woman.
And every woman is potentially different.
Yes. Barbie is inclusive. And that's, she's always young still.
Mhm. There was not an older Barbie.
I didn't see one. No.
Okay.
There was one scene where Barbie told a woman sitting on a bench waiting for a bus that she was beautiful, who was probably in her 80s. And the woman looked back at Barbie and said, I know.
And that if you follow the news clips, that's actually one of the most controversial scenes in the movie because they wanted to cut it. And the director said, that is the messaging. That is such a crucial point that without that scene, the movie isn't what I want it to be. That is a very important piece. So, it's interesting that you focused on that scene because that is a scene that they tried to cut. And the director was very adamant that that scene was a very important scene.
It was really memorable. It made an impression on me, that's for sure. But there wasn't enough of that. That was just one couple of second incident. The Barbies in Barbie Land are all of a certain age.
Hmm. So
And there was
Go ahead.
only one that was pregnant.
Okay.
Pregnant Barbies are just, it's something that we can't quite handle.
What about other diversities? LGBT represented?
The Kens all seemed a little bit that way.
Well, if that's Ken. What about there were no lesbian Barbies?
Well, the not explicitly, no.
Okay.
But even the CEO roundtable, the C-suite, they were somewhat effeminate and not 100% empowered. It was really interesting the way they presented some of the things in the movie. The whole empowerment thing was wow. Yeah, I definitely want to see it again. Like, I want to pick up on some of these nuances.
So it's Barbie. It's a lighthearted movie. Had some important messaging. Did a respectable job in diversity and inclusion. Didn't hit all the marks, but overall, you had a good outcome from it, and you felt seen. So there's that, right?
And I think that this whole movie is going to be a conversation for a long time to come.
And so, so that's a perfect place to wrap up, right? Is the marketing and the movie itself will self-perpetuate new audiences, right?
Yes.
Because that conversation we'll keep the brand alive, we'll keep the movie alive. If you choose to see it in the theater, that's one audience. If you choose to see it on another venue 6 months from now, it'll be a result of the fact you should still see this and they're still talking about this, right?
Yes.
You are the other important aspect of this is there was so much to unpack. You're ready to go back because you're like, oh, there's things I want to revisit.
You can't possibly, it happens so fast, you cannot possibly catch it all in one sitting. There's just no way. And there's a lot of great.
So we love return customers.
I am. Well, and here's another point that I would really like to make clear from a marketing point of view. I think Barbie was invented in 1959, was the first time that she came out. Now, just think about that. How many times has Barbie had to completely reinvent herself in alignment with whatever the culture was at that time? I mean, I remember seeing black Kens with afros during, the late 60s and 70s. There's just Barbie and Ken have reinvented themselves. I mean, and just the outfits, the whole.
They have and they haven't, right?
Yes, right? Good
because
point.
While they have diversified and represented different communities, Barbie is still basically, this ideal beauty, icon, regardless of which race she's representing. And probably not even an ideal, not a realistic idolization of beauty. So, while she may reinvent herself from different diversity aspects, she still holds true to the basic branding of this.
The perfection, the stereotypical beauty.
So while she's changed, she hasn't.
Yes.
So she's very much different and the same at the same time.
Which is so interesting.
If there were a sequel, would you go see it?
I think I might be skeptical. I would probably go see it just to go see it, but I'm not really sold on a sequel. And I just saw it last night.
So you're ready to go back and watch the original?
Yes, but I'm
this
not.
Is not
you,
a Marvel,
I think,
and this is not sort of a Marvel.
I am pretty sure that Mattel is going to have to sell me on the sequel. It's going to be a prove it to me. Tell me why I need to. This is a novelty. I was going to go see it no matter what.
And based on the marketing and the branding that you saw in this movie, do you think they'll achieve that?
Probably.
Yeah. I think they have the ability.
I'm not going to have any illusions about that.
Yeah. And, I would also say that you probably, being that it's a Barbie movie, went in with relatively low expectations, which were exceeded.
Yes, I would say that that's true.
Right. So it wasn't like you were expecting this to be War and Peace and you were disappointed. It was a Barbie movie that happened to have.
Was not expecting
poignant moments.
War and Peace. Yes.
So, let's be realistic. The expectation wasn't that high going into it. So, the bar wasn't set that high.
No, not at all.
Okay.
I went in quite open-minded, which is interesting in itself.
So, there's tons to unpack and we could continue, but what I'd like to do is maybe just sort of summarize some of the aspects that are important for marketing that we've seen in this campaign as it relates to the Barbie movie. The first thing that I'd like to say, and we launched with this idea, is marketing takes time. Most overnight successes are not. And we were subjected, if that's the right word, we were graced with 6 months worth of Barbie propaganda leading up to the release of the movie, which I think was quite successful because it became, it was Barbie was a known brand, but the movie, created, and the promotions for the movie created all kinds of awareness. So, we had some expectations going into it, but we also created a tremendous amount of, awareness. And this took time. And this was, we go as far back as at least 6 months, if not more, of active marketing for this and getting people involved. Getting people involved, I think, is the second really key point, was this interactiveness of the promotions and the marketing. Pink frames, Barbie like references, you show it, it's seen on social media. And not only is it being paid for and promoted directly by the marketers, now what we have is user-generated content. So your users who aren't getting paid are out there promoting your movie. If
And
you
partnerships also, other brands, it's not just people,
sure,
but brands that got involved.
Sure. I mean, there's lots of brands, but those are all paid people, right? Or have a vested interest in it. I think what's really important is when you get, your user base to be interactive and you get user generated content, because that's viral. That's where it becomes, I mean, that's the magic. Because first of all, you're not even paying for it. They're doing it for you. And they're doing it because they
so
want
and so is using a Barbie frame. I better look at that.
Right. I remember back in the day when Frozen came out, like it was so pervasive, and it was the same thing. It was like, it wasn't even the direct marketing in Frozen. It was all of the, user generated. My daughter was in preschool at the time, and every other kid had a Frozen thing, and then you better have it too if you wanted to be one of the cool kids. So this idea of engaging your audience to the degree that they will market for you, and you will have a viral aspect. If you can achieve that, like that, I think in my mind, the holy grail when it comes to marketing is getting your users to do it for you.
Yes.
Clearly doesn't get better than that when your users do it for you, because that's,
I don't think you can really achieve virality without that component.
Correct. And you can't, I mean, you can do a lot of creative things to try to encourage that, but sometimes they'll pick it up and sometimes they won't, thus the viral aspect of it. But when it happens, oh my God, it's huge. Right.
Yeah.
Another aspect which I think the movie attempted to, and you can argue it didn't quite get there, but did, was this idea of diversity and inclusion, and understanding that we are looking at very different audiences, and we need to understand what resonates with which audience. And the only way to do that is to either have people of that audience on your team, or at a very minimum, make sure that you go out to the real world and talk to people of different cultures, people of different backgrounds, so that we don't project on other groups what we think the messaging should be. Let them tell you. This is where we go back to developing business buyer personas and things like that, by actually talking to real people in different groups. So I think that another key aspect of Barbie was this idea of diversity and inclusion as a marketing strategy.
And I think they used a bit of nostalgia as well. If I were to think about the audience that I was in last night, I would say more than 50% was over 50 women. And I don't know what their target was, definitely people who have some sort of money, influence, whatever it is. And it was that age category that was the most engaged, giggling, at times crying, it was, and we saw ourselves, but we didn't see ourselves. You know what I mean? There was not,
I don't.
Barbie is not over 50.
Yeah. But she
Barbie
looks good.
is 30 at best, but she's been, probably at 26, whatever. Anyway, but isn't that interesting? I would say probably 60, maybe even 70% of the audience was over 50 women. And they were the ones that were the most enthusiastic about wearing pink and having fun. So there is a piece of nostalgia that's locked inside of this as well for all of us. But the diversity and inclusion, I'm going to say didn't hit the mark.
Okay. And then the last thing I think I want to sort of mention is timing, right? There's no accident when this movie is released. There's no accident that the movie was released against, a very huge, dark, counterpart, because, this movie to some degree is escapism. I'm assuming it's escapism. And, that's greatly needed, right? So people want to go to a movie theater in this day and age and feel good. even if it's for an hour and a half, right? How long is it, 90 or 2 hours?
This was almost 2 hours.
Okay, it's 120 minutes. That's a long time to feel happy, but but nonetheless, again, this is an opportunity. You know, there's a lot of craziness going on, and you got to sit in the dark and enjoy the moment and live in the
Yes.
moment, right? And people appreciate that. So, you know, there is, especially with your marketing, there is a tremendous impact of timing. You know, is this the right messaging considering where we're at? Is this what people are looking for? You know, and I would argue that this is exactly what people are looking for in
Yes.
the Barbie movie, right?
I would
Considering
concur.
all else that is going on, you know, this is the perfect time to release the Barbie movie, or was the perfect time to release the Barbie movie.
Yes.
So I hope you all go out and see the Barbie movie. I don't make any money off that. We don't make any royalties off it, but based on experience, you may be seen and heard. So we want that for you. But we also, from a marketing perspective, like this is a great sort of case study to take a look at and to sort of examine, you know, what they got right, what they missed the mark on, and how can you adapt some of these concepts into your own marketing. You know, understand it takes time. You know, what was your lead up? How long did you work towards that big release, right? You know, did you engage your audience? Is your audience working for you? Are they, you know, creating a viral aspect to what you're doing? You know, are you addressing the different variety of audiences that you could potentially reach through diversity and inclusion? And then ultimately, you know, just coming down to what's the timing, and, you know, is this the right message for now?
And a couple more points that I want to add to that. You know, if you do have some sort of a launch coming up, it's a great way to refresh your brand. For example, a friend of mine just launched a new website. And so he spent a lot of time teasing it out over months and getting people involved with, you know, do you like this one or that one? Use those opportunities to refresh your brand. Every launch is something that should be planned. And I think that's an opportunity that's missed by a lot of people.
And I also think that, you know, this idea of like reaching out to your audience, because a lot of times what we do is we build something, whether it be a website or otherwise, with sort of a foregone conclusion as to what it should be, right? And we project out there what we think you need to know. Whereas in your friend's case, you know, that he or she
He,
sought sorry,
he,
he sought input. He may have ended up going in a slightly different direction than he had probably originally planned based on that feedback. But it makes for a better website if you know, go out there. A lot of times, you know, your audience will tell you what to build if you listen to them,
yes,
and
and
it'll be so much more powerful as a result.
gorgeous. Yeah, it's different. I've never seen a website like it. Now, the other point that I want to make is, as you've mentioned several times, Mike, there are things that they got right about the Barbie movie and
Hmm.
things that they didn't. And let that be a lesson to you as well. You don't have to get it all right. There are some things that are just not worth perfecting. I mean, overall, this is probably going to be one of the most successful movies of all time. And yet they didn't get it all right.
But
And
they
you
never
don't
could.
have to. No.
And they never could, because no matter
And
how, like,
don't have that as a goal.
right. But I mean, no
Pick your
matter what they
battles.
did, there's
Yeah,
going to be some audience that's like, nah, no, you know.
exactly.
So you can't work for that. You reach as much as you can, or you achieve as much as you can, but that, you know, like this perfectionism, and holding back because it hasn't reached that level of perfection. Release the product, get it out there, get the feedback.
Yep.
That's not to say you don't do the work up front and you don't make sure that you know, you're presenting your best possible product, but don't hold out for perfection, because it's not obtainable, and there will always be somebody in the audience who will find something wrong with it, like Angela did. But you know, millions of Barbie goers are completely thrilled, and you just threw cold water on it. But you know, we won't hold that against you.
Well, and I'm going to go see it again.
Well, so they thank you anyway, because you're spending more money to go back and see it again. But again,
Yes.
you know, so I think it's a great case study from a marketing perspective. I think there's lots of things that they got absolutely right. There's a few things probably they missed the mark on, but that either will lead you to go back to see it again or watch the sequel or at least talk about it. So as we are, so that there is continued brand awareness and more people will be like, oh, maybe I should go check that out. Because there's no such thing as bad publicity. And on that note, thank you for joining us for another great edition of Badass Marketing. Angela, a pleasure as always. We will see you next week. Take care.
It's such a fun topic. See you, everyone.
Bye.